Gentlemen, to today's Bengal Club Library virtual talk, which is Anant Goenka in conversation with Shoma Chaudhury on Apocalypse Now, Analyzing India 2021, Media, Politics and People. Anant Goenka strategizes the new media initiatives at the Indian Express and handles its business publication division. He continuously innovates to stay ahead of rivals and simultaneously brings quality audience to the newspaper's online edition. He cut his teeth in journalism with Business India, a premier business magazine, and NDTV 24/7 before completing a Master of Arts in print journalism from the Annenberg School for Journalism, University of Southern California. Over the last 2 years, he has overhauled the newspaper's online edition, catapulting it to the top of the pecking order. Shoma Chaudhury is a journalist, editor, and political commentator. She was managing editor and one of the founders of Tehelka. She also co-founded and was director of Think, an international conference of ideas, and Algebra, the Arts and Ideas Club, a platform for live conversations with prominent Indians. She is also the founder of Lucid Lines Productions, an intellectual properties company, and recently started a news show on YouTube called Enquiry with Shoma Chaudhury. So before I hand over to them, I'd just like to request the audience to type in your questions in the chat box as usual during the course of their conversation. And I'll ask some to Anant and Shoma after the interview. Over to you, Shoma and Anant.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's not a happy time to be speaking. It's not a happy time to be having any dialogue at all. You know, you call it a war zone, a tsunami, an inferno, apocalypse. You could run through your dictionary and still not really describe the time that we're seeing. And, you know, there's this acute sense of a missing leadership, missing governments, every parameter is perverse. And so really what I want to discuss here is that what has brought us to this point, you know, media, politics, people, in what proportion is each one responsible for what we are seeing? And is it really an epic pandemic that has brought us to this point, or has the pandemic really revealed things that were crumbling and rotting at its core in any case, you know? And to discuss this, one really needs a kind of courage, clarity, and ethical compass. And the Indian Express is a paper that throughout the tumultuous history of India has stood its ground and tried to stay close to core values. So I'm particularly happy to be speaking to its executive director, Anant Goenka, and thank you all of you who are joining in. It's the first time that we are speaking at the Calcutta Club, and that's an honor. So thank you.
Bengal Club, Shoma.
Oh, sorry, the Bengal Club.
That's fine. No, Anant is fine. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add to Shoma said, absolutely. It's a very interesting talk. It's an important conversation, I think. And, you know, any conversation gets very educative when Shoma's in the room. I mean, she just brings so much to, you know, she just, you know, I feel the same question and the same perspective, the way she articulates it is very unique and different. So I'm really looking forward.
Thank you, Anand. So let me start, Anand, that I washed my introduction with a lot of words. Let me ask you that if you were to pick a word to really describe our time, what would you pick? And where would you place it on the Richter scale of horror?
No, you know, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, I think the easy word is scary. I think the more complicated word and the more complicated way to process where we are is kind of searching. You know, I think you're finding, and I'm not talking about just media and politics. I really feel that if you looking closely at how our audience behaves, and you know, I spend a lot of time doing that. I spend a lot of time going into the back end and kind of seeing, you know, user data and stuff, and I really enjoy that. I really feel the whole audience of, you know, consumers of news, where people are just kind of more in tune and more active citizens, right? I just feel everybody's looking for a purpose. The purpose of kind of waking up, kind of going and doing your job or doing whatever your daily routine. I think that has changed so much that I think everybody's kind of, you know, I think everybody's questioning everything now. Everybody's questioning the basics, the fundamentals, right from, you know, what should I be voting for? What kind of content should I be sharing? What should I be doing? How should I be adding value to my building society? That's a Bombay phenomena more than a Calcutta one maybe, but to my neighborhood, to my country, to my community. So I think there are a lot of very important and tough questions that I think people are asking themselves now, and I think that's I think that's, I think once anybody starts going down this process of introspection and kind of reflection and thinking about purpose, I think almost always you'll see generally there is hopefully something good that comes at the end of these questions.
So the question I asked Anant was that I think you're right that there is a great sense of introspection, like a breaking out of a trance.
Yes.
And you certainly get that in our strata of society. We'll have to see more down, on the ground, whether that trance is broken. But the question, I'd posed was that, do you think that whatever this trigger point is, the sense of horror, the sense of introspection, is that something that's been triggered by the pandemic? Or do you think that there are other reasons why there's this sudden sense of searchingness?
No, I think the pandemic, I think the second wave, and just I feel how all institutions have kind of behaved over the course of the last, X number of years. But especially, I feel that we have, in a sense, been, there is this during pandemic time frame in our minds, and we are kind of assessing a lot closer how institutions, how organizations, how people have behaved in these tough and trying times. And so I think so I think that so I think the pandemic to one degree, but I think now with the second wave, the kind of just the helplessness of it all is kind of making it's kind of precipitating those questions much more.
So Anant, I really do want to hold this conversation with a great degree of candor, because really, like I said, when you see such a horrific, tragic collapse around us, the one thing at least each of us can do is bring candor to our conversations.
Sure.
So that the first I'd like to ask you that in this spectrum of everything that we're seeing, personally speaking for yourself, what has made it scary? What are you most horrified by? And what introspection are you personally faced with?
Ooh, no, sure. I tell you, and I wish I had a less selfish answer or a less self-involved answer. But the truth is, the field that we are in, Shoma, you and I, our business, I think it's I'm struggling, and I have to admit, I especially a few days ago, I had a moment where I've never felt like that in my life. I just really felt so helpless. Not just because of the content that we consume, but just because we are engaged in the business, as an employer, I have to say, we've got 150 reporters, photojournalists on the front line, getting stories, reporting from hospitals, from crematorium, from path labs, from just across the board. And it's you just feel a sense of, it's a very confusing time for me, I must, and I'm being very honest, and maybe I'm being too honest. I have a problem with doing that. But when the first lockdown happened and we kind of had to go, we couldn't sell the newspaper. Uh, we instituted a pay cut in the company. We couldn't sell the paper. There were the hawkers were not. How do your business just kind of collapses literally in a span of 2 weeks. Obviously, the digital business was growing and has done exceedingly well in terms of interest and audience, but your core fundamental business by which you pay salaries kind of just got shaken overnight. Along with the fact that there has never been a more important time for these journalists and reporters to be doing their job than there is today. They have been at it, and obviously my heart goes out to the healthcare workers, because and the police, and they are the people who have they are the heroes and they're the gods. But from my limited perspective, I felt my employees, my colleagues in our industry, have done more than beyond, have gone above and beyond. They've put themselves in harm's way every day, continuously. Uh, and we have been helpless in being able to help them when they need, and when they need help, when they need things. And even just the core, just the fundamental, the fundamental business of it was so severely challenged at the peak of the COVID. So it was a really confusing and tough time. And as
So
we've
that
got
that
so many people whose parents have got, in Delhi now, most of our operations in Delhi, as you probably know. uh, we get calls. I feel a sense, our whole company feels a sense of an obligation to help out your employees and your members when when they call saying we need oxygen, we need a bed.
But Anand, I'm sorry to break
Yeah,
in there, but in a sense that what you're feeling is a microcosm of what everyone
of
in
course.
different
Yeah.
spheres is feeling, and what the common thread in that is helplessness. It's
Yes.
impotence, and it's at least speaking for myself, extreme anger, because what we are seeing, and so I'm going to bring you to the first pillar of our conversation, is the politics in our country. It's the leadership, because
Yeah.
one, we are seeing the ferocity of a virus, and there's the disease in itself.
Yes.
And many countries have been brought to their knees in the face of that. But what we are also seeing right now is a particular Indian situation where there's a complete, at least from my perspective, a complete abdication and breakdown of leadership. And that's where, Anant, I'd like to ask that, for you, is there a sense that you believed this leadership would do better? Is there a moment of introspection? Is there a new mood to want to speak out and challenge a leadership that the country put a lot of faith on, that had a big electoral mandate?
Yeah.
What would you say as a newsman and in your individual
Yeah.
capacity?
Yeah. No, I think there's no question, and I think that I don't think anybody's doubting the fact that we declared victory early on, and there was a lot of things a lot of preparation that could have gone in that probably didn't happen as fast as it should have. There were, at various levels, in fact, at every level. I think if you look closely into every story, you'll see there has been a collapse of leadership, and there has been just inaction, or and there has been distraction with many other things that have happened. um, and I think our job, Shoma, is to call it out, is to report what we find, what we see. And I think the distinction that I like to make, and we have discussed before, and I get a lot of um, I I get some pushback from my friends and colleagues in our industry, because I always want to nuance this and distinguish it, not for any other reason, just because I feel it's important that I think it's important that we go into a story looking to find facts, not having first decided what we want to find and then go looking for the facts to support that argument. And which is not to say that, clear. So to answer your question, I think, of course, and I think from my understanding, I do think there's been a lot of introspection even in leadership. That how did we get to a stage where we declared victory so early on? But our
No,
job is
Anand,
only to call out.
let's actually call a spade a spade. So there is an inaction. There was a sleeping on the job, and a sense that one declared victory too early.
Yes.
But I think right now, like I said, when one is faced by such a epidemic tragedy,
Yes.
that the least we can do is be candid. That now, post the crisis flaring up, in stages, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Delhi, now it's beginning to hit Bengal, Uttarakhand, UP, down south, Andhra Pradesh.
Absolutely.
Do
And we'll go
you
rural then.
actually, yeah, rural India, we haven't even begun to ride this wave. Do you feel actually that there is any introspection? Is there any candor from the political leadership? And here's where I would ask you a question, Anand, that do you feel the media has let down the country in not holding the leadership to book? Did we create a savior complex which has allowed leadership to be blind, not to be questioned? So really, Anand, if you were to look at the big ethical challenge we all face today, what would you like? First, spell out what all about this is horrifying you in terms
Yeah.
of the leadership, political leadership, not ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think if you read the Express, we've been flagging various data points that went ignored, or that for whatever reason didn't get the attention that it should have. And I think that's our job, is to find those facts and put them out. Um, has media created this situation? I mean, I is there any doubt, right? Like there was I mean, I think media largely, and I'm creating a distinction. I think it's an important distinction between print and television, because I think specifically television, I think has completely abdicated that space of questioning, of asking tough questions, of being unrehearsed when they go into conversations with people in power. This idea of auditing people in power altogether, uh, I would say, especially television, has just abdicated and just has thrown its hands up from it. Uh, I don't think that that's been the case at the Express. I genuinely, and I'm not saying this because I genuinely feel that there has been a fair amount of journalism in India which has been independent, which has been questioning, which has been consistent in doing that. I think the Hindu, for instance, has been questioning, and it's a mainstream legacy news organization. It has been trying to do, it does what it kind of feels. We of course have been doing the same, uh, and so I think that space is there. But I think, again, so to answer your question, yes, I do think a lot of media has abdicated that job and that responsibility.
Right. So, I want to stay with the political leadership a little bit more. And it is Mr. Modi's leadership because, he has accrued to himself a lot of accolades, a lot of self-promotion, a lot of praise from the world. So I think now when things have, shit has hit the roof, we also need to lay it where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to come to, what has brought us to this moment in history in terms of the people of India and the media. But let me come to the political leadership, Anand. Like I said, the Express has a proud history. It's lived through the emergency. It asks questions during the emergency. Very often, people make a distinction between, governments of the past and the one currently, which calls it nationalistic. Says that it's a decisive leadership. Today, if you were to compare, with all the political knowledge you have, of what are the big failings of Mr. Modi's administration, where would you place that?
No, Shoma, listen. I'm not the editor of the newspaper. I read the paper the next morning, just like every other reader does. I want to. So I'm not being safe. I'm just being. I don't think this is my. It's not my place to come and list out my personal political view. But I do think that there has been a. I mean, again, I'm just going to say what I said earlier, in that we are asking tough questions, and I think if I am to audit the Express's role through the pandemic, the Express's role through the last from the emergency to today, I can only say that we have been doing the right thing. I think we've been objective. We have support, as you said, as we've discussed last time we spoke. We have done stories which people have hated us, which have supported the government. So I struggle to take this black and white kind of an approach. And
no, I wasn't asking.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to corral you into a position, and nor am I asking you for a black and white position. But you're not only speaking here in the capacity of proprietor of Indian Express. It's also as a citizen, and it's as a newsman altogether.
Sure.
So I'm not pulling it back always to what Express is doing.
Yeah.
I was asking you as an analyzer of our time right now. But I'll come back to it because I'm not letting you off that easy. So I am going to come back to it. But let me move away just momentarily to this. This, as I said, there's Mr. Modi's administration, but there's also politics in all of the states. And there is a sense that India itself is going through a moment in its political history, which is different from ever before, because we've mostly had a very multifaceted politics, and now we don't. So what I was trying to ask you to spell out, if for a moment you step away from just what Express is doing, spell out what you see to be big problems in our politics right now. What is different about this moment in India's history from any that has gone before?
Hmm. So I don't know if I'll be exactly answering your question, but I will take you down a path that I kind of think about a lot. You know, I studied journalism. The gentleman who introduced me, he it was a very nice introduction, but he read out a bio of mine from 6 or 7 years ago. But there was one thing which obviously is that I studied journalism at USC, and you know I had this professor who I was a teaching assistant for, and he would start every class, and I was TA, I was a student once, I was a TA once, and I asked him, he started every class by asking his students, what are you all doing here, why all in class? And they all didn't know how to answer, and he said, well, somebody said, you know, some kid would say, but where would you rather we be? And he said, I don't, just be on the street, I mean, protest, why you even come into school, like fine, you know, just protest. And the kids be like, protest what? You know? And this professor would say, who cares, just find something and go protest, like be on the street, like, you know, just be noisy, like just be out there, you know, just find something to kind of hate on, and to kind of call out. um, you know, the Pulitzer Prize, every newspaper that Joseph Pulitzer published had a tagline in its editorial pages that said, whatever it is, it's wrong. I don't know, I'm sure you probably know more, you know, this more than I do. But I find that really interesting, that, you know, that was the idea, I guess, the liberal, you know, the liberal Western world idea of the role of media, the Western world idea of what media's relationship with society and politics should be. And I think that today in the Indian context has maybe come a bit at odds. And we're now questioning that very thought. Ki, yeah, you know, don't protest if there's nothing to protest. No, be grateful for what you have. You know, uh, don't, you know, ask questions, but only when, you know. I mean, there's always this kind of
Yeah,
this
yes.
sense of saying, you know. So I think, and I think there are reasons for that, right? I think, you know, in my interactions with editors, publishers from around the world, I feel that a lot of their conviction in their relationship and their contract with society and government comes from, you know, the events of World War II. I think they get their strength and their conviction and their approach from that episode. I think in the Indian context, maybe we haven't had that kind of an episode. We still think of the fact that, you know, uh, our neighborhood is such, you know, we have never attacked, we've always been attacked. So, you know, so I think because our context is a little bit different, um that conviction in, you know, whatever it is, it's wrong, is not as unanimous in the consumers of news in India, maybe as it is in a developed in the Western world. And I'm not saying this with judgment. I'm just saying this with just simple
That's
analysis and
observation.
yeah. So
So,
I think this question, which we didn't have, you know, with the emergency was that moment for us. The emergency was that moment in India where, you know, we kind of all sort of reposed our faith in democracy, and we kind of all, you know, citizens, press, politics, society all sort of said, you know, we need somebody to question, we need this fourth pillar, you know, that whole thing started with that. That whole conviction came from there. And I think to some degree, because the support that this that approach is getting now is being questioned, I think we have to figure out why. And if you ask me, I think that is one interesting thing that we are now at odds with. And I think this tussle, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
so in fact, I am going to ask you that, but if I may just for a moment use my moderator's prerogative to also give my sense of, you know, what
Please
is
do.
for me
Please do.
problematic about what we are going through,
Yes, yes.
is that, you know, we often refer back to the emergency. And what was the saving grace about the emergency was that it was so obvious, it was so brutal, it was so large, and it was very clearly acknowledged as an abdication of the constitution. You know, your civil rights were revoked, and the government and everyone around was aware of that. You know, lakhs were put into jail. So it was a very visible phenomenon. I think what worries me deeply now is that the movement towards authoritarianism that we are going towards is seemingly very normative. It's done as sniper shots. It's not, you know, visible in the sense that lakhs are being put in jail. And because it's sniper shots, there's no common cause, you know, and it's also done through a mandate. So it's not like the government is even acknowledging that it is
Exactly.
taking away your rights,
No, I think that mandate that you said, Shoma, is the point I want to keep underlining, and I keep saying, there is a certain that it is authoritative. It is not only in India. This is a trend that you're seeing in many parts of the world, and there is this sense of, there is this mandate. I think the authoritarianism or the authoritativeness of this of the leadership and the management really comes from the mandate, right? Like the fact that they are, that there is a certain support. I guess there is a certain. So I think we have to be introspective about that. Why is there this kind of support for a setup which is so which is as authoritative as this is? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No, that is what I was going to ask. That, for me, that's the disturbing rupture, that it approximates some of the impulses of the emergency, but it's not declared, and it's normative, and people are buying into it. So what is that
I must
psyche?
say, but people keep drawing parallels with the emergency and the state today. Ki us time declared tha, this time it's not. I've heard this before, and I'm just paraphrasing what you kind of saying. And of course, I feel the space for free press, for free speech, is is less than it was earlier. But I just, because we are the Indian Express, and because I really can't take that hat off, especially in a public conversation, uh, I have to say, and you can hate me for it, but I have to say, you read the paper, you see how independent and questioning we are, you see the kind of investigations we do. uh, I haven't gotten any pressure. I personally, I haven't, the ministers are, they give interviews, access isn't, denied in that sense. I mean, of course, they're not as accessible as, as we have been used to in the past and that, but fundamentally, the fact that the Express is, is allowed to do what it does, uh, I I mean, we have to just note that, I mean, I feel it's very difficult for me to ignore that.
Sure. No, and of course there's the Express. There are other digital outfits that are, trying to keep that idea of questioning government. That's the core of journalism, and that's there. So let me.
I'm not a big fan of most of the digital outfits, I must say.
Okay, that's interesting. Why?
Yeah, I
Do
mean,
you feel it's
I'm
become too?
coming out and saying, I mean, you know, I I'm saying it because you brought it up, because firstly, I I don't like being compared with them, because I feel that we do a lot of reporting. That's what
Right.
journalism is. It's the exclusive, it's the original, it's the going out and finding the facts. And most of the digital outfits don't have the bandwidth for it. If they do, they start with an opinion of what they want to find, and then they go looking for it. So they're very, very partisan, I feel. And the investment and the time and the effort that they go into opinion is disproportionate to what they kind of go into actually putting out original content. I mean, original content isn't like original reporting.
Yeah.
So because you kind of were, I guess, comparing us, I wanted to draw a distinction and say, look, we are not them. And we were the only news organization that got this an interview with Sonia Gandhi on the pandemic. We're the only news organization. Well, right next to which there was a column by the vice president of India. So I really like that, and I don't see that happening in most of the digital organizations.
No, I think that's a point well made, Anant, that it's not that one wants partisanship one way or the other. And if there's extreme predictability to any news organization where you already know what they're going to say before you've read their coverage, I think that's anyway shooting yourself in the heel. So I'll take that distinction. But, again, I get it that you're not a sociologist and you're not a historian, but our conversation was meant to analyze from the fact that you have a good vantage point, in analyzing contemporary India, that when we're looking at this, so one, there's this romance with the idea of a supreme leader, a savior leader, and I think that when we say that they got a big mandate, it's important to look at that mandate. And again, of course, this is from your analysis and your perspective, that do you think it was a mandate which was actually a hope mandate, which, that Mr. Modi had positioned himself as someone who would be an able administrator, who would sabka haath, sabka vikas. There was a lot of inclusive sloganeering, and that in some ways they have betrayed that mandate. Or do you think that the mandate was for a Hindutva idea of nationalism, where there may be many of us who dissent with that, but do you think that the big electoral mandate was for a new kind of Hindutva-driven nationalism?
We can't answer this in the binary. I think a report card on Modi is something which is going to be a very nuanced one. That he's done a lot of great things. He's done a lot of questionable things. All leaders have this kind of a history, I think that report card is being written again every day in in the Express, and I think we'll keep writing it. And it's just about how objective we can be in that report card, that I kind of take pride in kind of what we do.
Okay, so let's move to Bengal, and then we'll come back to the media conversation, because that's really, you have a great locus to speak on that. But Bengal has just come out of an election which was consuming, which was carnivalesque, which extended over a long period of time. And now there's a pushback mandate. How do you read this particular Bengal election? What is it saying? What do you think, again, were mistakes that the media made? And of course, we're holding Mr. Modi responsible for, doing that while the pandemic was creeping up on us. But how do you read this entire election?
I think one interesting piece, and a piece that bothers me about the Bengal election, and I mean, especially post-election, actually, more than the election, is the elimination of the center, of that middle ground, right? It was a clearly, it was a two-party election. And that disappearance of that middle space is what I think is going to be very interesting, and not interesting. I think that actually is the scary part for me for the next year or 2 years of Bengal. In the people of Bengal club, depending on where on how they voted, I guess, depending on how they voted, are going to be sharing a video of a BJP guy being attacked or a TMC person being attacked. You will never, it'd be very, very difficult to see somebody who voted for TMC sharing a video of TMC attacking BJP, or vice versa. And I think that idea, one, obviously, credit to Mamta for giving a decisive, for landing a decisive victory, no question. But I think it's a very polarized, it's left a very polarized environment in Bengal, and honestly, it really, really scares me. And I visit Calcutta a lot. I've been visiting there since my whole life. My mom's from Calcutta, so I go there a lot. And I've seen, as an American Californian, as a Californian student, idealistic student, to a Jholawala journalist, to a to a business person. I've seen, from my vantage point, that's obviously changed a lot in the last 20 years. I've kind of seen this evolve very closely. I've seen a lot of bitterness. I've seen a lot of polarization, and maybe Bengal has seen that in the past as well, of course. But I think this election particularly, I think, is going to amplify that divide.
And do you have a sense? So, like I'm trying to probe you on the people's psyche. Of course, it's a very generic term. But speaking of Bengal, like you said, you're familiar with it. It does have a history of political violence. It's cadres versus cadres. So, what then is troubling you that much about the fault line? Earlier it was CPM versus Congress, then it was TMC versus the left. Yeah. Now it's the BJP versus the TMC. So why are you feeling that it is particularly apocalyptic, to go back to our title?
I'll tell you, because I feel if I were to give a typically Express, balanced, nuanced report on the performance of a particular bureaucrat or a minister or whatever of the state, it will just not get the kind of virality or audience as one which is extremely sensational and taking a side. And this is what I think happened in America. that led to a Trump kind of a situation, whether you had just two factions and one completely feeling disenfranchised from the other. It led to from an American context, an extremely violent, time. And so I just see that kind of, I'm nervous about that kind of happening here. I wish, I wish there was even, even a 30%, a 15 to 20% improvement in performance of the Congress and their group, would have showed that there is some space for a middle ground. There is some space for a kind of a nuance. There is some interest that people have in not taking two extreme sides. I think it's come down to that now.
Right. Now you've opened up the third front, this conversation about the Congress, which is just, which of course requires, because, one thing that India needs, and I think anybody, whichever end of the political spectrum one stands on, that this country needs a multi-voiced, a polyphonic politics, and the Congress has, of course, let everyone down deeply as well. What's your analysis of the Congress, and why is it not shaping up as the opposition it needs to be?
I think it's the biggest mystery of Indian politics here. And I would love your view, because if you ask me, I think the stronger the government, the more pressure they put on free press. I've said this all the time. The more pressure they put on free press. It's nothing new. It's nothing unique to India. It's been happening around the world every time. The stronger the government, the stronger the government, the more fake news. Firstly, that's an important thing to understand. The stronger the government, the biggest fake news of the century, as my chief editor Rajkamal Jha always says, is very interesting, is when Colin Powell stood up at the UN and said that we found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, right? That was the definition of fake news. And that came from government. So the fake news is as old as governments are. And the stronger the government, the more sort of difficult or the less space that they like to give to questioning voices. That's just how it is. I think, the indecision of the family, the lack of an option. I don't know what it is, but their indecision and the Congress's indecision of getting a leader who's openly saying, boss, I want to be leader, I'm going to do a good job, and kind of, the kind of talent that Congress has that just runs all the way down to the lowest level across the country, political talent. It is incredible. You have seen this better than I have. In every election, I always do a travel. I didn't do this time because of COVID. I am always amazed at the sheer talent, the understanding of politics, the conviction in their, just the familiarity of the role that the Congress party has. You don't see that in most other parties, even the regional strong parties. You don't see that. And you're just wasting it. You're just wasting it for what? I don't understand. You are not giving, honestly, I think democracy isn't getting the kind of, they're letting democracy down just by not showing up.
Yeah. You asked me for my
perspective.
Yeah. So for the Congress, absolutely. I think they're just in a stranglehold, psychological stranglehold. And it's important to remember that there's just so much that we take for granted about the country has emerged from a politics of the foundational Congress. I won't say the Congress that we look at now, but I think they almost admit to the psychological hold that the family has over them. But what I find interesting is that they think they have no alternative. The country thinks that there's no alternative to Mr. Modi. And the one thing I'd like to say there is that when you know in one way or the other, a poisonous situation is there, like if you know that you're imbibing poison of some kind, you don't think, what's my option to the poison? And you keep having the poison. You first stop imbibing the poison and some other food will appear. And that's where I think, in my perspective, is where India stands today. I think we definitely need an alternative to the kind of Congress and opposition that it's failing to be. We need an alternative to Mr. Modi, but it doesn't matter if it's not presenting itself yet. We know we don't need these things, and you've got to stop there and let the creativity of a vacuum kick in, because something else will appear. And I think that itself, the fact that I think we forget in history that coalition governments or less strong governments have done perfectly well for this country, Of
course. They've done better. They've done better, in fact.
Both economically, in terms of plurality, social cohesion, and we've bought into this myth that for 70 years nothing has happened and that India was born in 2013, and I think nobody in their right mind can agree with that. But that's my perspective, and it's not because I'm just adversarial to a certain politics. I genuinely think democracy deserves better, and certainly as one like ours. But let me then come to.
I'll just add to what you're saying. You're saying there is not. I'm not. I think there are so many alternatives within the Congress. If the family doesn't want to be the leader, and if they do, even if they do, there are enough people that they can kind of, they've got two solid options, and if not, there are other people. But why aren't they deciding? Why aren't they kind of doing anything about it? And you have the Congress hierarchy. The uncles of the Congress are writing. And again, it was an Express story, by the way. I have to plug it that we broke that story. That the Express, this letter that went to the leadership. It was our break, and the response was so hostile, and it was surprising because you're taking pride in the fact that even though it's a family party, you kind of allow conversation, you allow it's not. I mean, how much Rahul has been underlining. Has been underlining the fact that it's a democratic process within the Congress, and then the one letter that comes, you have the kind of response. So
But Anant, here I would actually place the accountability for this squarely back on all these supposed other talented leaders. Because the one thing one has to admire about Mr. Modi is that he was not given power; he just usurped power. He set aside. He has a will to power. And if there are others in the Congress who think they're going to be good leaders, then, the baton of power is never passed on. I mean, it's not like Nehru passed it on to Indira Gandhi. She took it when she had to, and
power is taken.
Yeah, it's taken.
It's never given. Yeah.
And if the Congress has that many talented leaders, they better develop some spine, it's not, I mean, Rahul has stepped aside several times and they just keep putting the crown right back on their heads, so, but that apart, let me come back to just analyzing this title that we gave ourselves, which is Apocalypse Now. And you agreed to the title, so now the onus is on you a little bit, which is that apart from the pandemic, if you were to identify 7 or 8 pillars that make you feel this time is apocalyptic, what would you pick?
Wow, 7 or 8 pillars to that apocalyptic. I didn't give the title that much thought, I must admit now, after you asked me this. Right. No, I think, look, as I said, right, like we're all introspecting a lot. I think a very important thing that we don't stress and underline enough is the role of business. I feel there are so many businesses which are completely shaken to their core in the pandemic and post-pandemic, and there are a whole bunch of other businesses which actually have just kind of have just exploded. When I say exploded, I mean in a good way. I mean they've just kind of they've multiplied, and I think that we are so I think one of the things that I think is interesting and important is that our relationship, whether it's media or society, with corporates is going to be under again a lot of change post pandemic, because I think you're going to see a lot of in every industry you'll see a lot of consolidation. Anyway, we're living in a world where the kind of concentration of power that exists pretty much with the big tech of Silicon Valley over the world, we have never seen in the history of the world. We've never seen any government, any company have the kind of power a handful of tech companies have over the entire world today. And often these are people who become kingmakers to other businesses. And so whether it is, and doesn't have to be only digital businesses, but there are businesses that have just kind of become so critical to us as a country or society. Our relationship with them, I think, is going to is again, I think, a big. I don't want to use the word apocalyptic. I think it's again a word. It's again is a big change. And I don't think we've quite figured out how much of power shift there's going to be with this consolidation that's happened. I can't say in corporate India, but basically in businesses and in industry.
Big tech, yeah. No, and in fact, when you're talking about big technology, and that is impacting society in a huge way, because whether you look at politics, people, or media, which are the 3 things that we identified we wanted to talk about, technology is changing all of that, and even the legal framework within which they operate. And that brings one also to the market, because all of this while that we're looking at this terrible destruction around us. The market is floating free as though it's another planet,
Right.
and it's just like on a high as though it's living in some other sphere altogether. And that's again being driven by technology and a kind of optimism around big tech.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to just nuance what I was saying and what you were saying right now, because you're right. And, when I'm saying consolidation of power, I'm using big tech as an example, but I see that happening in other industries, which may not even be tech driven. I mean, I'm sure there are some business people here. I'm seeing some familiar names, so maybe, but I'm not going to hesitate to call out. I'm hesitating to call anybody out. But I'm saying you're seeing in every industry that the biggest is getting bigger. They're either eating up the smaller guys are kind of just shutting down, or they're selling out. And what's happening then in markets is that the 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 multiplier that you're giving the value to these companies, is just it's you're you're valuing forward earnings so much more than you did earlier. It's creating an environment where the people who are not the biggest are either saying, you know what, we're going to stop producing, we're going to stop being entrepreneurial, and we're just going to, either be traders, or we're going to kind of literally invest in this growth of literally, like, you just buying shares and seeing the kind of optimism and growth that the largest companies will have. And so I'm not, and the theories, I'm not taking a view on kind of whether this is good or bad for India. So that's why I'm hesitant to use the word apocalyptic, but I'm saying it's a big change, because we always took pride in the fact, I mean, we didn't always, we took a lot of pride in the fact that in every industry there were hundreds and thousands of SMBs and SMEs that made it up, and the entrepreneurial spirit of the Indian trader businessman. uh, I think the pandemic is forcing that shift where, the person, I think people are being a little bit more risk averse. And the guys who have taken the risk, and the guys who are the top of the heap in their industries, are kind of the guys who are seeing, are taking the risk and kind of seeing the reward for that. And a lot of people are becoming a little bit risk averse, and kind of wanting to bet on somebody else other than on themselves. So it's a little bit contradictory to what you keep seeing in media because of all the space we give startups. But I actually see the other piece, which I think is a much more dynamic and changing part.
So it's interesting you brought that up, and because we're just touching on a lot of things, I'm sure the audience will pick up on what particular aspects interest them. But one other thing that we were talking about this time, which I think is very different from even the generations after we achieved independence, is that one good pillar seemed to be that there's an anti-elitism that the advent of this government brought, and I think that was needed. But especially since we're speaking in the context of Calcutta and Bengal, what is dismaying for me, and I want to ask you if you agree, is that it's not just anti-elitism. We are living through a time which is very anti-knowledge and very anti-intellectualism, anti-science, so there's a strange hostility to all of that, and a celebration of, not cultural renaissance, but a kind of atavism, So do you think that that's
Again, I think
that as well?
Yeah, again, I think to some degree you're probably right, but I actually would view it a little differently. I would view it as, we have always, I think, I don't think we've understood just how important identity is for not just Indians but for the world, especially the elites, the intellectual elites. I mean, I think this is what happened in America. I think what happened in India as well, right? The way you would see intellectuals looking down on things that kind of just are just reaffirming Indian identity, and we look at it, we scorn it, say it's not scientific, for instance, early on, when I think when the Prime Minister started evangelizing yoga, it's not to say that because we are talking about yoga that we are saying modern medicine is bad. I feel like a lot of intellectuals came with this binary, and they said, "Arey, yeah, but why don't you encourage the pharma industry instead of doing yoga?" I don't
Yeah.
I don't think that's the I think as media, and I have this conversation a lot with all types of journalists. Sometimes I do feel that because we are, we've got the kind of the exposure, the education, and the intellectual exposure we kind of come from, we can be, I think we have been often, we haven't looked at this, at the importance we put to Indian identity. Uh, and I think that that's one of the things that you see playing out right now.
Yeah, no, that's of course been that's a very important strand, and you're right. But I think the point I was making was not that we reject our heritage, and there was a great space that liberals only looked at Westernism as modernity,
Yes.
and that there's definitely something there to be corrected. But sadly, it's not like there's any, like I said, it's not like a revival or renaissance of our own proud and extremely rich intellectual heritage or cultural heritage. It's been brought down to a level where you really say cows exhale methane, oxygen rather than methane, so I think that's the part I was, and it's.
I don't know, Shoma. I mean, that, I mean, of course, there are the loonies who say things like that. I mean, sure, the cows, exhale oxygen. I mean, but I feel, I mean, why are we so, I mean, my grandfather started the Express, right? He had this lovely place in Chennai. And even today, if you go there, his daughter-in-law, I won't, my family tree is very complicated. I won't waste people's time explaining it. But Saroj Adiji, I call her. It's a place called Express Estates. It's 18 acres in the heart of Chennai. 9 acres is now the Express Avenues Mall. The other 9 acres is the bungalow. And I remember as a kid, I remember going there. There were always hundreds of cows, and the whole house revolved around this thing. I mean, from my memory, yeah, I was quite young, but I remember fondly. The milk came straight from the even my Calcutta house. It was a similar situation. The milk came straight from the cow. We made butter with it. There was a ghee. The whole kitchen, the whole ecosystem, kind of gave a lot of respect and reverence to the role of the cow. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that you should be banning beef, but I don't think we should be disrespecting the importance that people give to the cow. I mean, I've seen it in my own family, and I mean, I think it's wonderful if you can get access to Indian cow milk. Why not? I mean, why do we hate on this habit so much?
No, again, I totally agree. So, all of this is pulling us back to some probably the one or two last questions I'll ask you before we open this up,
Yeah,
which is the media and the narratives that we create. But just to clarify what I was saying, Anant is not at all in opposition to the cow. In fact, when I was running Tehelka, we did a big cover story on the cow and the Indian cow, because it is truly unique.
Yes.
It's very hardy, it's very productive. And in fact, bringing the Jersey cows and all that was really jeopardizing the Indian cow, because we haven't even been keeping the gene pool alive. And we have such a wide variety of cows. And of course, we again underestimate the sheer employment and economic value of the entire, the industry around the cow,
yes.
eco industry around the cow. And again, its cultural importance. One has no opposition to any of that. I think it's again about what narratives.
The business of it, right? I mean, the amount of steroids and hormones we have been pumping into these cows now. I mean, so I should not get into the cow business. Sorry, go back to what you were saying.
No, but it is a very interesting symptom of, just like you said, the knee-jerk scorn around the cow, even around cow urine. I think that's lack of knowledge. But it's also the government's problem that they present it as kind of rustic assertion rather than, really explicate why one should value that. But that apart, it'll take us into too narrow a conversation.
Yeah.
I want to bring you back to something you know very well, which is the crisis of the media. You've spoken of the Express. Just for a moment, set it aside and be candid. What do you think is making it so difficult for proprietors of very large organizations to stand their ground, to stick with core values? What is that crisis at the heart of the media? Is it really the spine of a proprietor rather than any structural issues?
Shoma, I have to, I mean, how do I speak for other proprietors? I mean, it's very difficult for me to say why are they as, why are there, why are they, why the backbones are as soft as they are? I do think the simplistic answer, but the only answer I can really kind of come to is that it became such a big business. It became a business, it became a P&L which was so important. And you're seeing this playing out so much during COVID, right? Where you have to recognize there are some industries which cannot be viewed only as a business. You're seeing this so clearly in the vaccine pharma industry right now, when, every second day there's some ridiculous thought about how much you charge a vaccine, who should buy it. Because I'm not making enough money, 150 rupees, but I am making some money, but I need to make more in order for me to save the whole country. I mean, it's so funny how this vaccine conversation is happening. I think it really shows that there are some spaces which cannot be viewed as a pure and only business perspective. And I think what we have done is we have brought this ruthless corporate mindset, which is an important mindset to bring if you're running a business. We have brought this mindset into news. You can bring it into media if you want to, but into the news sector. I think that is probably what has made proprietors become, slaves to their profit and loss statement, slaves to their balance sheet. Uh, as I was saying early on when we started this conversation, I think now, and so the purpose, what is that purpose? What is the reason to be? Is there reason to be to create value, make, give jobs and make money? Are they taking that approach? Are they taking an approach which is, what we like to believe, which is independent, empowering India, thinking, questioning, putting a role, uh, taking your role very, very seriously, which is, of course, you have to be financially independent to be able to do it well, and that's of course a critical part of it. But our approach to it is to be financially independent in order to do independent journalism. Here we're saying, I feel a lot of businesses, a lot of media businesses in India, which are news driven, are saying the opposite way. They're saying, we have to make money, whatever it takes to do that, we'll do. And I think that's kind of why we're in the situation we are, especially television. Television has become, it's such an I don't know who watches news television anymore. We I don't know if I should be giving names of personalities, but I think we will, and then we'll probably get to some audience questions. But I was surprisingly about 2-3 months ago, the Nation himself, who I always thought of as a friend, I still think of as a friend, decided to launch into a 13-minute tirade against Express and me personally for some journalism, some story that we did. I was really surprised because Shoma, I'm not Shoma Chaudhury. I'm not a well-known journalist. I'm a poor newspaper proprietor, right? That's how I would think of myself, right? And I'm not somebody who's on TV every day giving opinions about things that, that's not how I view my role. I was so surprised. 13 minutes, there was a personal attack consistently. And nobody told me about it. The Express, we've got 500 journalistic people, whether you desk reporters, editors, whatever. Not one person told me. I found out 4 days later because somebody tweeted something at me, which I kind of was awake and I read. And I asked, I said, guys, how come nobody knew this? And everybody said, we didn't know. So on prime time, I'm personally being attacked for 13 minutes. And nobody in the entire Express group or my friends or my family, nobody, even found out enough to come and tell me. So I do think that it's one example I'm giving you. I mean, it's the one that came to me right now, but I think I am seeing a lot of indicators that there is a complete rejection of now television news. I believe that there is a lot of interest and investment in authentic. There's a lot of audience interest in authentic domain expert content. Our growth on the digital platform, we are one of the world's largest news platforms now digitally. We're doing 180 million unique users a month in 6 languages across the world. The kind of growth we have seen on our digital platforms this year, we've seen a lot of growth over the last 5-6 years, but this year especially, as I think is extremely encouraging. I think the audiences are rejecting, I think, a lot of what we see on television. And it's a very slippery slope, because once you go down this path, you can't come out of it. You have to be very, you need that TRP meter next to you. The anchors is responding to the TRP meter. Okay, if I'm taking this view, my viewership is going up. I'm taking that view, my viewership is falling down. I can't afford to invest in the original anymore. So my whole television programming is just a bunch of talking heads in studios, and it's about who can be more, loud than the other. It's what it's become. It's unfortunate, and it is become this way, I believe, because that we are been made slaves to our profit and loss statements and not to our core purpose.
Thank you very much, Anant. I was smiling all this while because I think this is a new badge of pride that everyone should want to wear in the media business, which is, you said, a poor news proprietor.
Yes, I must say I take a lot of pride in.
I think I'm going to always introduce you as that, as your badge of courage. And but really, I think you've got to the heart of the matter, which is, we started this conversation by saying somewhere, you said this, the sign of hope is that we're all searching. I think at every corner of our personal lives, professional lives, we have to find that basic ethical compass again, and with the proprietors, definitely, you have to understand why you came into a certain business, and then how do you make it wholesome within that. So I think you've hit the heart of the matter, Anand. You were asking my perspective on something that I do feel it's a very apocalyptic time, but I would place a huge amount of that onus and responsibility at the door of the media, even more than with politics or people, because one way or the other, media shapes narratives. And I think Mr. Modi has been let down by the media, because if people kept him more on his toes and kept him more, challenged and held him to his own words and his own PR positions, he would have probably been a better leader. He has some good qualities. But I think that runaway power that he has accrued is very much on the media's, I think that's on us. I think the media has really let the country down.
Yeah, if I mean, and I wanted to, I think that was a great way to end the conversation, go to audience, but I wanted to add one small thing. It's also the media which identifies itself, we discussed this earlier, the media identifies itself as antagonistic, as questioning, openly, ideologically openly done that. And there is a great space for, I mean, we must encourage a space for activism. We must encourage a space for, sort of ideological positions which are at odds with the authority and the government power. But I think media has also done a big disservice by claiming to be journalistic and objective and being the other side of the spectrum. I think they have also therefore lost credibility of the people who are in the middle, or people who are kind of supporting this government. I think the best role that media can do is to have the people who voted for the people in power to actually say, yeah, he let me down here, he didn't let me down here, rather than just say, yeah, reinforcing how you kind of behave. So I think when you say media, I'm saying it's not just mainstream media, it's all media that I think has kind of let Modi down, has let us down, and has let, I think even their long-term sustainability, I think, is going to be in question because of it.
Absolutely. Now, I'm glad you made that point. At the very least, let's all go back to evidence-based questioning, and issue-based questioning. So thank you very much, Anant. And I'm going to open this up to the audience and let you all take over now.
So there are a number of questions. So I'm going to be prioritizing those topics which have not been directly covered in your conversation. The first is from Shoma Chaudhury. Do you think the declaration of victory too soon by political leaders and the media's triumphalism, which was clearly evident as well, fed off each other? So he's asking whether there's a nexus, if not a direct one, then maybe a convergence of interests.
Shoma, you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, unless it was it in a way harks back to what we've been discussing all this while, that I think media has gone too close to government, and it's become such a handout of government positions. There's no intellectual questioning, there's no evidence-based journalism, there's no reporting on ground, and you're not asked, it's literally saying the minister says this, or a ministry says this, and that is why there's such consonance between government and media that they feed into each other. So yes, very much so, that they're just a mirror image of each other now.
Yeah, I also would hesitate to kind of, paint all media with one brush.
Yeah, of course.
And, I do think that, yeah, I mean, and fair now, and okay, so we must admit our failure also then, Shoma, as journalists, that, we probably didn't invest we probably didn't realize, or we kind of believed the experts that were telling us that, the numbers are dropping, or we kind of didn't, we probably didn't question that as much as we thought, because, we said, okay, the numbers are dropping, it looked like that. We have a lot of experts in the Express panel, and we kind of do that. But, I guess, I don't know whether anybody really thought of, of flagging maybe some things which we now have discovered that, hey, was flagged but didn't get any attention. Uh, so this is one of the problems of, interact of kind of dealing in a scenario where information flows is so tight, is so tightly held to the chest. You don't get to realize the number of data points that were kind of flagged, which said that, look, we're opening up too fast. And again, I'm not saying, this is not a Modi bashing statement. I'm saying this is actually something which I think has happened across the board, right? Every state government was opening up. So I think we're also a bit at fault in that sense, that we didn't know. But I'm just drawing a distinction between the media that just kind of published handouts versus media that kind of, that would have questioned had
But
they
lulled themselves. Yeah.
So there's a second question which is essentially about sharing culpability between the state governments and the center. This is from Nandini Khaitan. She is saying that there's a context that a lot of people say it's the state's responsibility to handle COVID kind of stuff. And therefore it's being unfair to the center. But she also suggests that if the captain takes the credit, see the Davos speech, then should part of the blame also not go to the captain?
Yeah, I mean, I
There's
agree.
how much blame is I guess the question.
No, I agree. It's very difficult to say to what degree who's to blame. We had an interview with the chief of the Bombay Municipality Corporation, the Bombay Municipality, yesterday, literally yesterday, and and his statement on record to us was, I got whatever support I wanted from the government when I asked for it. Of course, the government took its time in the first few days to figure out how to get oxygen, etc., etc. But whatever I wanted, I've gotten. So he tells me, or he tells the newsroom in our interview, that the relationship between center and state is not as bad as you're making it out to be in the crisis management. I do think it's particularly bad in Delhi. In fact, in Delhi, I think, and we've said this, it is shameful. It is shameful how poorly they're communicating. It is shameful how much of blame they're throwing around. It is really, really unfortunate. And I blame everybody, not no one person. I think I think the media's role really has been, it's not our role to make state and center talk together. That's not our job. Our job is to actually expose the fault lines. So I think center and state, most other center and states don't seem to be having the kind of issue that Delhi is having for whatever reason.
This is a question about a slightly different thing, but related. What about muzzling of news that is not comfortable to the center, like the farmers' protest on the borders, or the use of draconian laws to suppress protest? Have you faced this? Does this happen?
I think we've discussed this a lot, and so maybe I'll just add to it by saying that there is some press which doesn't like to question authorities, and there is some that does. And I think that objectivity, the interest in objective news, and the credibility of news that has invested in being objective, I think is only growing. So of course there is a sort of pressure to not do content which is not friendly to the powers. It's always been the case. There's nothing new about that. But there is a lot of press which does its job. I think that like the Express, and we're recognized for it. I don't know, Shoma, if you have a different view. I think we've spoken about this a lot, so I don't know how to summarize my answer.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a lot of questions about the role of the press, which you have also talked about during the course of the conversation. And I'm going to club some questions together from Mr. J. Mitra. What moral core should be developed to hold this crude populist juggernaut ravaging the country? And he's talking about the role of the press. I mean, you talked about paying attention to the balance sheet and nothing else, but I think he's looking for a solution rather than...
Shoma, I'll let you take this.
Well, I think Anant, did spell it out earlier, and sadly, at the very beginning, I would say that this is an individual ethical compass issue, because just one person can change the course of an industry. We saw TN Session change the election commission. And like that, I believe if 6 or 7 proprietors developed a spine and, woke up one day and said, what did we come into this business for? I think things would change quite easily, because there is space for meaningful, purposeful, evidence-based, and yet attractive journalism. I'm not saying it has to be dull and boring, but I think that intention has to be there, and that intention and essential courage is lost. So we can discuss all the structural issues. I personally believe we should all be paying much more for the media than we do. We are willing to pay for 600 rupees for a cup of coffee, but not for our intellectual consumptions. And so that is a huge structural issue. But other than that, I do believe all of this can change overnight if 6 people in this country decide that they want to do it differently, and it would have a domino effect. So the rest, yes, we can discuss what the government is doing, how difficult it's making it. But you stand up and, history has shown this again and again, enough, like a critical mass of people stand up and things change.
Anant briefly referred to how Delhi is treated by the center, and this is a very specific question from Archana Ketan. How would Ramnath ji have used the might of the Express to counter the veto power undemocratically given to the Lieutenant Governor in Delhi?
Wow, that's a very specific question. You're right. So I'd like to ask. I don't know if she can speak, but I'd like to ask her. Do you believe? And it's an internal question, right? Do you believe that we should be thinking of ourselves as we are in time of war? When you are at war, you're normally at war with an enemy, with somebody else. There's normally a person, an identifiable person who you kind of know the motives of. You kind of maybe know where they live. You understand their short-term and long-term objectives. In which scenario, the flag, you recognize your flag, and you kind of, the role of press kind of becomes. I want to say changes, but you kind of recognize that you're at war. Shoma, are we in a situation now where you feel that is something that we should be cognizant of?
I just, in a normal, yes, in a normal war situation where you're with an enemy nation, quote unquote, of course, the press for that time plays a much more coordinated role with government. Yeah. But I do think we're in a state of war, and I just did an interview with Lieutenant General Huda, and he was encouraging the vocabulary of that. He said, we should say it's a national emergency,
yes,
invoke the Union War Book. But it's
he also said the army should be playing a bigger role, right? I think
he said that, and because it can coordinate better and all of that. But I think, yes, we are at war. We are at war with a huge force, which is the virus. But I think at this juncture, we should be hyper vigilant about the government, because the failures of what we are really, the tragedy of our time is not so much the disease. Our mortality has increased, our tragedy and our stress and everything that people are suffering is increased because of a failure of government. It's not just because of the force of the disease. And so at this juncture, I think, you were talking about this rift between the center and Delhi. There's a very petty politics playing itself out. I mean, the fact that the Solicitor General and the centers repeatedly in court arguing over the amount of oxygen to give, the fact that courts are having to give administrative orders, it's an embarrassment, it's a breakdown. And I think we need to be hyper vigilant and asking questions about the government. Vis-a-vis the specific question about abrogating power to the Lieutenant General Governor, it happened before the peak of the pandemic hit us, when they changed the law governing Delhi. And there wasn't enough outcry on it. Again, it was deemed that because it has a mandate, because Parliament has passed it, it's okay. But I think we need to remind ourselves that we are not just an electoral democracy, we're a constitutional democracy. Yes. And as the media, we also uphold constitutional democracy, not just electoral math. And so I think there's no two ways about the fact that what the center has done to the Delhi government is unconstitutional. It may have been passed by Parliament, but I hope somebody challenges it.
All right, so there's still a very large number of questions for which I don't think there is time. I'm just going to ask the last question, which is from Mr. Somaseka Sundaresan, who is asking, with reference to the rot in the press and about a number of them feeding off the government, not being critical enough. Do you see any prospect of this at all changing? I guess this is to both of you.
Sorry, yeah, I lost your audio for a bit. So I started reading the question, but I couldn't find it. I'm so sorry. Shoma, you want to take that first, and I'll try to understand the question from your answer.
I'll rephrase it to you and bat it right back to you, which is that, do you see this rot in the media changing anytime soon?
Yeah, okay. So I'm very encouraged that I think that we are stuck in. You're absolutely right. We're stuck in a complete rut, and it's very, very rotten, the state of the environment. I do see it changing. I think the Western, for instance, all this Western press, the kind of, I'm seeing a question from Pradeep Kheruka here as well, which I think is interesting when I'm trying to answer both together. The kind of outcry that the Western press is saying that, media's not asking any questions, it's abdicated its job, it's not doing its role. I really think that that's very, very lazy to say. Actually, I think the press, we have a lot of press, especially the Express, but even other press has been doing its job. We've got reporters on ground. We've been doing a lot of hard work covering the pandemic, asking tough questions, asking questions of people in power. And I'm saying that I see audiences respecting that. I see a big change in the pandemic. I see, as I said earlier, I think people wanted to, would come with an ideology first. They would say, this is what I believe. I want to believe that I want to believe that Modi is the best guy in the world. And then I'm going to read the opinions that kind of from a platform that gives me that. Versus now where we're getting analysis, which is nuanced, which is objective. You cannot predict Pratap Bhanumetta's opinion. He is every time he writes, it is the most read column of the day. You cannot predict the kind of domain experts that have gotten virality in the last. So I think audiences are beginning to reject this, and I think I hope if we look back, this will be one really short but a very bad phase of Indian media. I do think we'll kind of emerge from it.
All right, so that was a wonderful and very, very informative session for us. And before the official vote of thanks, can I please ask Nandini Khaitan, who is personally responsible for arranging this talk, to say a few words. Nandini?
Thank you, Saroja. Thank you, Shoma, so much for coming in first. I want to thank you first because I know you had a kind of a tough time. So to see you here today, smiling, asking Anant tough questions and keeping at it, I'm personally really grateful for that. So thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. And I hope to see you in Bengal and Calcutta personally. Anant, thank you so much for trying to be as candid as you can. I think you played it a little safe, but it's tough times. And I would just like to end this, thank you, with this slight anecdote. Recently, a friend of mine sent me a photograph, and it was an Express story. And I said that assuming it's not fake because it's Express, whatever the story spoke about wasn't, something I liked. And he said that, well, it's an Express story. And if you're saying this, that means, that speaks volumes that you're putting caveats. I said, I've gotten used to putting caveats to everything where there's a news article or a photograph or any such thing. But I kind of thought back on that and I was like, Express is the one paper where I actually don't second guess. So thank you for carrying on that, that absolutely independent form of journalism that you do every single day. Thank you. And I hope to see you in Calcutta very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And now may I call upon my colleague on the Library Subcommittee, Professor Chaitanya Mutru, to deliver the official vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure really to thank.
Chaitanya, please unmute yourself. Yes.
Brilliant to the core and talking about things which we all like to talk about and constantly showing a hardcore optimism amidst all the chaos around us. Thank you very much. The entire Library Subcommittee of the Bengal Club joins me in thanking you. Thanks due to everybody else related with this program, people who organized it, my colleague Sri Sarojesh Mukherjee, and of course, Guru Dash for coordinating the technicalities of this session. Thank you all. Goodbye and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shoma. Always a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you, Anant. And just to add to all the accolades coming your way, I've stopped almost all the newspapers at my door except Express. It's the first thing I read in the morning.
So happy to hear. So happy to hear. Thank you so much.
Any such comments in the comments box that people read only the Express and no other paper. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.